Hi, I'm Oliver, and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Whoo-wee, it is hot at the moment in the UK. I am struggling under these lights. It is too hot. I apologise for the red face that kind of looks a bit like spam. I can't help it. It's just so warm. It's not conducive to filmmaking, I've got to tell you. So I made the decision this year not to bother with a favourite albums of the year so far list, just because I thought there's probably more interesting content that I can make for this channel other than that video. So if you do want to find out what my favourite records are of the year, simply you can just look back through all of the roundups I've done so far this year and you will see my favourite records. Alternatively, if you want just a simple list, I will put a list up on Twitter and Facebook at some point in the next week. So if you want to follow me on those social media outlets, you'll see that there. Another month and another one stacked full of releases. There are tons of interesting things to talk about this month, so I'm excited to do that. Before I start, anything Kanye related that's come out in the last 5-6 weeks, I'm going to put in a separate video which I'll release at some point this month. I call it the Yeezy Season 2018 Review Roundup. So that'll include Ye, that'll include the Nas record, Tiana Taylor, Kids See Ghosts, and the Pusha record too. So look out for that at some point in July. Also, after a little bit of constructive feedback in the comment section of the last Roundup video from Aaron Van Os, so thank you for your constructive feedback, I've switched around the order that I talk about these records. So I will be starting with the records I don't like, and then I'll be going to the records I like, and we'll end on a very positive note with the albums that I loved this month. So let me know your thoughts on this version of the format, and maybe we'll tweak it again. Do not like. Gorillaz, the Now Now. Genre, synth pop, disco, funk. Well, it's better than Humans, which is essentially like saying it's better than Indigestion. At least it doesn't have the bloated excess of the last record, a record which kind of tripped over its own shoelaces and hit its face on the pavement on the second track. It was just such an absolute disaster, Humans. In comparison, this is more stripped back. There are no features on it. This is basically a Damon Albarn solo record, albeit in name really. It's tracks full of disco, funk, and some upbeat pop vignettes. I mean, that sounds pretty likeable, right? Yeah, I guess, but it has about as much depth as an Iggy Azalea lyric. There's 11 tracks here of almost completely forgettable B-sides. This really doesn't need to be an album. I'm struggling to understand why this was even put out in the first place. It seems like a lot of fuss for basically nothing interesting at all, and also, is anyone else fed up with Damon Albarn's processed vocals, those digitally processed vocals? Just sing in your natural voice and put it out like that. We know you can do it because we've all heard it before. But that grated on me just all the way through this record. Really didn't like it. The Carters, Everything Is Love. Genre, trap, hip-hop. So this has been labelled by some critics and journalists and fans as the closer to a trilogy of records, beginning with Beyoncé's scathing Lemonade, followed up by the very apologetic 444 from Jay-Z, and now the duo are back together and they're in love, despite Jay-Z being a cheating scumbag and getting kicked by Solange in an elevator. I think Lemonade's a brilliant record. I think 444 is one of the most conscious and interesting records Jay's put out in a long time, which perhaps isn't the highest praise, but and Everything Is Love to me is just nothing like either of these two records. It's like the audible equivalent of someone scribbling across a page and then trying to charge thousands for it. Again, a bit like the Gorillaz record, it seems like a lot of fuss for nothing of interest or substance. These two should know better than to release this kind of record. It's just the most lowest common denominator, unimaginative kind of record, and I realised that pretty much from the beginning, where you get the track Ape Shit featuring Quavo of Migos, and it just sounds like every other trap song we've ever heard. I listened to it and thought, I can't believe you guys are putting this out, because you've put out some amazing projects, even in recent years. So, I mean, what is this project? It feels cynical, bloated, and almost entirely lacking in any personality. And I say cynical because, Jay and Beyonce did their world tour, and it feels like maybe this record was just put out because it's good to sell more tickets, or it's good to, use some of the press coverage they were getting from their tour to put this out at the same time. I don't know. I'm not really sure why this was released, because I'm just surprised I've said it about someone like Beyonce after her incendiary career over the last 5 years, but I think it proves that any artist can slip into laziness, and that's what this album feels like to me. It's lazy. Father John Misty, God's Favourite Customer. Genre, indie rock, folk. So I didn't like songwriter Father John Misty's previous record, Pure Comedy, and to be honest, I don't really like Father John Misty as a songwriter in general. As such, this review kind of wrote itself really. I went into this expecting the same sort of vibes as I got from Pure Comedy, and I got the same thing. And I just don't get him as a songwriter. I don't gel with his personality. I don't gel with his approach to songwriting. I find a lot of Josh Tillman's stuff trite, egotistical, quite self-congratulating, and although I didn't find that quite as much as I did with Pure Comedy, and where that really came out in full force, and I think the people that like his music really gravitate to that, I just don't like it. That's a downside to me. I was still switched off on this by that egotistical personality that does bleed into his music. In terms of instrumentation, his jangly singer-songwriter folk rock ballad stuff barely has enough to keep me engaged, and it makes me wonder what people see in him as a songwriter. Personally, I think his lyricism has about as much depth as a puddle, and I don't really understand why people think there's real heavy bouts of philosophical weight to his work. I think a lot of it just comes across as a little bit wry, a little bit cynical, not particularly clever. That's just the way I see his writing. Once again, his lyricism on this record is performed as if it has a genuine heft to it, when there appears to be actually very little substance to what he's saying. And that was my chief complaint with Pure Comedy, and that's my chief complaint with this album as well. It just doesn't do anything for me, although the album artwork is beautiful. Look at those colours. Drake, Scorpion, genre, R&B, hip-hop. Fatigue. Why does this have to be such a long record, Drake? Why not make a 45-minute record? Is there any need to put out a project of this length? I don't think it's possible to deny Drake's penchant for creating a killer single. He's good at doing that. He's created some solid pop tracks with things like Passion Fruit, Nice for What, God's Plan, and they seem to get everybody moving when they come on. But I can also remember a time when Drake put a record out and it wasn't this bloated excess. It had some genuine thought put into its sequencing, and it was fairly cohesive. For me, I think Nothing Was the Same as 2013 record is one of the best things he's done. I still don't think it's an amazing album, but I think it's the best example of Drake's abilities also to marry hip-hop and modern R&B. I think that's the best thing he's done, and I think Scorpion is just another part of this downward trajectory in his abilities as a songwriter, if he writes his songs, who knows, as a musician, as a star. Really, since that 2013 record, I get the sense it doesn't really matter what Drake does because he's going to get so much attention for it anyway. I mean, I say his downward trajectory as a star. I mean, really, it's an upward trajectory in terms of success, but in terms of artistic integrity, whether you think Drake had much of that in the first place or not, I think it's gone way more downhill with something like Scorpion, which is just one of the most tiring records. And it's the most tiring record I heard this month, primarily due to how bloody long it is, and it does not reward from that running time at all. It doesn't deserve to be that long. There are far too many low points in a record that has something like 25 tracks, I think. Had 40 and Drake sat there and picked maybe the 8 or 9 of the best tracks on this album, it could have been alright, and it wouldn't have given me a headache listening to it start to finish. But apparently they wanted to put out a big old long project, so that's unfortunately what we got. And from what I'm hearing from a lot of other people, what I'm feeling is not uncommon at all. Some good tracks are buried in here. God's Plan, obviously, everyone's heard that already, but 8 out of 10. Sandra's Rose, Peak, Don't Matter to Me, which features the late king of pop MJ. Even with these tracks, though, there's still a sense in them that Drake is on auto drive. We have heard these tracks time and time again. Drake is doing nothing new with this release. It is pretty much a cookie cutter exact of what Views sounded like. There's nothing interesting here. If you really like Drake, then maybe you'll enjoy this because it's more of the same. But yeah, it was a tiring old listen for me. I like Oneohtrix Point Never, Age Of, genre, electronic, experimental, ambient. If you want to find a record this month that twists and bends your minds, it's right here. I'm a big fan of OPN, and those of you that aren't aware of him, it's the moniker of Daniel Lopatin, an electronic musician from America. He's created some of the most vital electronic records of the last 10 years, and that's not hyperbolic at all. I really do mean that. Albums like R+7, Replica, Garden of Delete, his Good Time soundtrack, which is the Safdie brothers film with Robert Pattinson in it. That was an amazing soundtrack. He is an incredibly talented musician. And as an artist that reinvents himself a lot, Age of shouldn't have been as much of a surprise as it was, because you're used to him doing new things all the time. However, when you reach the track Babylon, where you have Lopatin himself singing, and it's this strange cross between Bon Iver's self-titled and third record, and then this other worldly sound that he's conjuring, I was genuinely taken aback. I never expected to hear his voice on one of his records, and it's him taking yet another instrument, and this time his voice, and creating something altogether new out of it, and it works really well. His blending of electronic textures and live instrumentation makes for a very frenzied 42 minutes of listening, especially the prevalence of a harpsichord, and that use of a harpsichord completely throws you for a loop as you're listening to it. It sounds as if the record is almost out of time, because a harpsichord you tend to connect to music of the Baroque period, but then you have all of these mind-melting synthesizer sounds and samples. So I imagine someone might unearth this record in 200-300 years and not be able to pinpoint exactly when it came from. I'm still cracking on with this album, and every time I listen to it I'm finding more and more to enjoy, but I really do like it, and if you are a fan of electronic music, you owe it to yourself to check this out. Serpentwithfeet, Soil. Genre, left field pop, electronic, gospel. Serpentwithfeet is the moniker of Josiah Wise, a US musician from Baltimore who's creating some genuinely compelling left field pop fused with electronic and gospel influences. Vocally, he reminds me a little bit of Dev Hynes from Blood Orange, a warm voice, but also it has bite when it needs it. Just to try and paint Wise's collision of more experimental abstract sounds and in the pop side of things, his debut EP was actually a collaboration with the Haxan Cloak, who released the incredible record Excavations a number of years ago. You need to go and listen to that. You owe it to yourself to go and get a completely nightmarish scape of dark ambient and drone. It's terrifying. Serpentwithfeet's debut album Soil is full of artistic idiosyncrasies, albeit ones which don't move too far away from simply enjoyable things to listen to. The warm organ tone on Wrong Tree, the rolling bass on Cherubim, or Wise's very strong vocal delivery over half-time electronic drums on the track Invoice. Occasionally the record slips into less compelling moments, maybe moments where you could have a slightly stronger hook, like on the track Slow Syrup, but overall, a strong release, and I'm excited to see what Wise will create next. Death Grips, Year of the Snitch. Genre, Death Grips? People are calling this Death Grips' strangest record to date, which is saying a lot when you're talking about frickin' Death Grips. I think weird effectively sums up the reaction that everybody has constantly to a band who have taken non-stop left turns throughout all of their career, and this is another left turn. They've been defying, creating and collapsing expectations ever since 2011, and Year of the Snitch is no different. It opens up with such a euphoric and melodic chord sequence. I was really surprised. I thought, this is not Death Grips, surely. It sounds so uplifting. Of course, everything starts to sort of disintegrate into more corrosive stylings as the track goes on. But, you know, this time the trio are playing with melody more than they ever have before, and that was a really enjoyable thing to hear. I think this is a solid record. I don't think it hits as hard as the previous record Bottomless Pit did, and I don't think it's as out there or as fascinating as something like No Love Deep Web, which is hands down my favourite Death Grips record. But it's a solid release again from them. I have a lot more to say about this. I'm still formulating my thoughts, but you are going to be getting a guide to Death Grips next week. So you'll be able to hear loads more about Year of the Snitch and the rest of their career then. You have been warned. 9 Inch Nails, Bad Witch. Genre, electronic rock, industrial, experimental. Another release from the band that are celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. 9 Inch Nails are a band who have an incredibly strong back catalogue, especially for a band that's been going on so long. You know, lovingly curated and developed and created by Trent Reznor. Bad Witch to me is a weaker release than the previous 9 Inch Nails records we've had. We had the Not at the Actual Events EP and we had the Add Violence EP, and I think they're stronger, but I think Trent's nihilistic fervour and anxiety is as barbed as ever on Bad Witch, and that's always a positive thing when you're talking about Trent Reznor. Ahead of Ourselves has a vocal hook which takes the track down a very dancey path. You have the atonal sax wailings on the track Play the Goddamn Part, and you also have the droning of I'm Not From This World, which is just brilliant. It sounds like from this record that Trent wants to take things even more abstract with 9 Inch Nails and actually fuse a lot of his and Atticus Ross's soundtrack work and include some of those ideas in 9 Inch Nails' work, which is fine by me because I think this is a really interesting record. I think it could perhaps be more immediate, and I feel like maybe the next release will be. It's still another solid release though. 9 Inch Nails are, you know, pretty unstoppable. Emilie and Nicolas, Tranquille, Emile. Genre, modern R&B, pop. Emilie and Nicolas is a Norwegian artist fusing modern R&B with a Scandinavian grace. If you love artists like Kalila, for example, I think you'd really like this record. Emilie went through a horrendous ordeal between her last record and this one. She actually had a brain tumour. She was out of action for 4 years. She took a lot of time off to recover, recoup, and then she sort of poured everything into this new record, Tranquille, Emile. The album itself, though, is actually not informed by the brain tumour that she had. She actually fell in love with someone, and then they broke up, and it's kind of about a love lost, really. And it proves that, you know, through all of the horrendous things we can go through as humans, love kind of conquers all in many ways. And I think that's what comes across on this record. The album is absolutely a heartbreak record. It's full of gorgeous flourishes of strings, deep bass, sonorous drum recordings, and of course Emilia's very rich vocal tone. A track like Goddamn should be everywhere right now because it has such a killer hook. It's this very atmospheric R&B track. It really should be on the radio everywhere. But what I love about it is it doesn't lose the intimacy that the rest of the record has. It still has that personal attachment that I think makes her music breathe. I actually recently interviewed Emilie for the line of Best Fit. I did an article on it. If you want to read that and read about the 9 songs that sort of inspired her on her musical journey of recent, then check that out on my Twitter feed. Very strong album. I love Kamasi Washington, Heaven and Earth. Genre, jazz. The jazz heavyweight Kamasi Washington is back and following up his incredibly successful 2015 record, The Epic, with a double album. I mean, technically it's actually now a triple album because we've just received the 3rd bonus record, The Choice, which then makes up a particularly long, expansive journey throughout this record. We have Heaven and Earth and The Choice. Washington is an artist that jazz snobs love to hate, put it simply. They argue that even though he's rhythmically brilliant, he lacks any kind of uniqueness in his playing. His melodic constructions aren't particularly interesting. I think more than anything, they don't like the fact he is incredibly popular with non-jazz fans. If you go to a Kamasi Washington gig these days, you're going to see people there who don't normally go to jazz gigs, and the snobs don't like that. But I think it's a great thing because it means people are having their horizons expanded, they're having their minds broadened, and that's brilliant. So who cares? This is if Kamasi Washington is a gateway to other jazz artists, then bring it on. Why do people have a problem with that? And even if Washington isn't the greatest sax player who has ever lived, and he's not the greatest sax player who's ever lived, he's still brilliant, and he's still doing things that no other jazz musician right now is doing. You know, other modern jazz that's kind of being done at the moment isn't on this scale. He's all about scale, Kamasi Washington, with his huge orchestral sounds backing his huge bands, and gospels and choirs and all these other things. You know, no one else is really doing that, and good on him that he's being noticed for it. As with The Epic, the sheer number of music to familiarise yourself with is staggering and almost quite overwhelming, because if we just take Heaven and Earth and ignore the bonus record, The Choice, which is about an hour long, you've got 2.5 hours of music to listen to here. The end of the first half, One of One, is blistering. It has these choir vocals that elevate everything to a very high level of spiritual beauty. The opening track, Fists of Fury cover, is so alive. The Psalmist shows that Washington knows how to lead a band that have a really clear grasp of dynamically building a track. I mean, that track really does groove. It's so damn good, this record. I look forward to listening to it and unlocking it even more. The Epic took a long time to really, truly percolate, and it has now because I've listened to it so many times, and I'll do exactly the same with Heaven and Earth. Can't wait. Gang Gang Dance, Kazuashita. Genre, electronic, psychedelia, dream pop. Gang Gang Dance's new record seems to have slipped by a lot of people, which I suppose isn't that surprising considering that it's the first record they've released since 2011. That last record, Eye Contact, is one of my favourite records of the past 10 years, and I don't say that lightly. One of the most brilliant, bizarre things you are likely to hear. It's a treasure trove of amazing tracks, and I would implore you to go and listen to that album if you've never heard it before. The New York band is led by the vocals of Lizzie Bugatsos, a silky lead which Grimes has become well known for, but actually Lizzie was doing it first, and in my opinion, better. Whilst I don't think Kazuashita hits the heights of Eye Contact, I mean, that would be very difficult for me to think anyway because I love that record so much. I think it's still a wonderfully full, vibrant record. It's like some hybrid of dream pop and electronic psychedelia, and it's there in that second track, J Tree, which has this sample at the end of it of a crowd of protesters greeting a herd of buffalo and all kind of cheering and whooping. And it's one of those really stirring moments that you maybe expect as the culmination of an album, not in the second track. Already you reach this very emotive high so early on. Young Boy reminds us that this band is so capable of creating a catchy drum sequence, and the rhythms are very much a part of Gang Gang Dance's style. I mean, it's maybe less rhythmically focused than Eye Contact in some ways, but a track like Young Boy reminds you that those abilities are still there in the mix. On a track like Much Too Soon, they use a mixture of tuned acoustic percussion and also electronic sequences, and it creates one of the catchiest beats on the entire record. A really fantastic album, and if you've never heard Gang Gang Dance before, you check this album out. If you want to hear more, check out their masterpiece Eye Contact, released in 2011. But yeah, one of my favourites of the month, without a doubt. Kate NV, For, genre, ambient. I've been following Kate Shalonsova since 2016 when she released her record Binasu, which, for any of you that were watching the channel when I had sort of 6,000 subscribers, that was one of my favourite records of 2016. I absolutely loved it. It's this strange left field pop album, and it was one of the best things I heard, and it irritated me how few people had actually been exposed to it in the first place. Her new album 4 is completely different. She almost entirely ditches the vocals that were pretty much a key focus on Binasu, and she builds a project full of sensitive, intimate capsules of sound. Kate really builds a world with her sounds, one that feels safe and sheltered. And with a lot of ambient records, musicians are keen to create soothing textures but have like an underlying tension, so there are those two opposites which unsettle and displace the listener in some ways also. And Kate doesn't do that at all on this record, and that's what makes it such a joy to listen to. Apparently this record was entirely inspired by her home city of Moscow, which really makes me want to visit it, because I want to see which locations, which places inspire this kind of very cozy sound creation, landscape creation, sonic creation. I think it's a really lovely album, and I know that it won't be on too many people's radars, and I think you should all go and listen to it if you have an interest in ambient music. It's lovely. Sophie, Oil of Every Pearl's Uninsides, genre, left field pop, avant pop, ending on an absolute triumph here. Sophie has an intoxicating and potent musical vision. I don't think anyone can deny that. A really pitch-perfect understanding of how to reach that real sweet spot of catchiness and also completely throw convention on the floor. And she does so over and over again on this record. The opening beatless atmospheric track It's Okay to Cry completely sold me, because Sophie's primarily known for those really metallic bangers, that very rhythmic, percussive, heavy sound, and so she decided to begin this album with completely something entirely different. And I think it shows an intimacy. It feels frank and honest, and I just loved that way of opening the record. It warmed me to the album just instantly. It feels like that shows her daring streak as well, because many artists would bury this kind of track later on in the album and you would front load the record with the more immediate tracks. She didn't do that. She opened with this track, and I love that she did that. She does, of course, flip this with second track Pony Boy, which has that clattering production. It rattles around your head. It's such a good track, and if you liked the production on the Vince Staple track Yeah Right off of his Big Fish Theory record last year, this is exactly the kind of percussion and the kind of production that you'll really enjoy. It's been a while since I found an artist that I'm completely in raptures about, and Sophie is one of those artists. This album has absolutely blew me away. It's one of the highlights of the year for me, no doubt, and I imagine when I get to my end of year list it will be somewhere high up, because I just think this is a daring, accomplished, original record, and I'm in love with it. There you go, that's my June roundup. That's all the records I listened to in June, minus all the Kanye releases, because I will get around to all of those at some point this month. Thank you for watching. Let me know your favourite records in the comments section below from June 2018. Let me know what you think of the records that I have reviewed and my thoughts on said records. Let me know if you like that Father John Misty record, because I'm sure a lot of you will. I'll be back next week, if all goes to plan, with my guide to Death Grips, and we should also have a 5 albums to get you into power electronics coming out this month as well, so watch this space. Thanks again for watching. See you soon.